I would like to discuss now the essentials of Benoni defense or Benoni opening. D4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e6, knight c3, e takes d, and c takes d. Now, Benoni was a lot more popular about maybe 20, 25 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago. And nowadays, white has wide range of opportunities, and as a result, they come out with a better position in most of the variations. There is e4, d6, and f4 system that is quite dangerous for black. Also, some positions with knight f3, e4 followed by bishop e2 is giving white some advantage. Overall, I wouldn't advise you to have this opening as a part of your repertoire for black, because what happens, mostly white chooses the variation, and variation mainly with e4, d6, and f4 is very dangerous. Now again, but I look at this opening from my own perspective. What would I choose, and what would I recommend if I had to recommend you to play one system for white? What I would recommend you to play after d6 is e4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, and this is mostly positional continuation. The move and variation is bishop g5. Now after bishop g5, it looks like absolutely harmless move, but it's not so. Black has a choice to play h6 or a6, those moves. Now why has to be played h6 or a6? Because if black simply castles here, then white would go knight d2, and black has a very hard time to get rid of white's pin on the diagonal h4, d8, and also black is going to have very hard time to make a6 and b5. So, which means black may not get any counterplay, any active play. And when you play Benoni with black, so you practically give your central e pawn with black for the wing pawn, which is c. So white has superiority in the center, and that's why you have to get active play against this pawn majority in the center, or you are risking to get very passive position. Well, now after knight d2, if black plays h6, white will simply go bishop h4, and after a6, a4, and on rook e8, bishop e2, now you can tell here that black has virtually no counterplay. There is nothing to play for here with black. So that's why I'm saying that two moves black has to choose from are h6 or a6. Now why h6 or a6? After a6 is one move. White, the idea of a6 moves is of course to go b5, but at the same time it's very important to stop bishop b5 check, and we will see why. For example, h6 move. What happens after h6? White would simply play bishop h4. Now after g5, white plays bishop g3. Now let me explain why a6 move is very important. Because if black castles now, Then white plays knight d2, and black will never have a chance to play knight h5, getting white's dark square bishop. And later on, the weakness on the king side of h6 and g5 pawns may turn out to be critical. So, but if black does play knight h5, then white plays bishop b5 check. Now imagine this: before bishop b5 check, if black played a6 instead of playing h6, and white played a4. If a6 and a4 moves are included, then after move knight h5, black has a fairly good position. What they're going to do, white cannot interfere with black's castling, and next move they're going to play knight takes g3, castle short, and they have very strong dark square bishop. But in this position, since moves a6 and a4 are not played, after knight h5, white has bishop b5 check. And black has to play king f8. Since black cannot interpose bishop or the knight, for the same reason on bishop d7 or knight d7, they are in danger of losing material. Pawn on d6. So after king f8, white plays e5. Now this is pawn sacrifice, which gives white a very, very strong position. Black must play knight takes g3, because after d takes e and bishop takes e5, they have really bad position. And after knight takes g3, white is taking this knight with f pawn. Now black plays d takes e, and white castles short. Now you can tell that black's king is not castled, the f file is open for white, and black may be even losing here, maybe has lost position. Position is very bad for black here. So for this reason, direct h6, bishop h4, g5 is not recommended on bishop g3, knight h5. So what black does, black plays a6, but now white does not want to play a4, because then black will play, as we already mentioned, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and knight h5. And here black is doing perfectly okay, because they don't have to walk with the king to f8, and they're going to castle and get white's dark square bishop. So on a6, the correct move for white is to prevent h6, g5, and knight h5. The way they can prevent that maneuver by playing knight d2. You can tell now h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3 does not allow knight h5, because queen will simply take to h5. So it stops h6 and g5, but does not stop the b5 move. Black can go b5. And here, best move for white is queen c2, and if black castles, white would go bishop e2, and here is what white's plan is. White wants to play a4 eventually. That's why I like this position for white. And after b4, knight b1, and then by playing f3, we support the e-pawn and play knight to c4, followed by the other knight to d2. That will give white all the critical outposts in its center and big pressure on black's position. So black cannot allow it, and fighting with it is not so easy. So after queen c2, suppose they play h6 and we go bishop h4 or even bishop e3. Now bishop h4 is okay, rook e8, and we go a4, and after b4, knight b1. Or maybe even knight d1 with the same idea. Knight d1 and knight e3 puts the knight on c4. Or if you went knight b1, knight c4, and then knight d2, also puts the knight on c4. It's a very little difference. It's a matter of taste. Which one would you prefer, knight b1 or knight d1? But that's the basic idea. Only thing you have to watch out for here, when you castle, if black goes g5 and bishop g3, knight takes d5, but even that is not a problem because white can simply take, and then d6 pawn will be hanging. You see the d6 pawn. Knight can take on d6 simply. So based on this, we come to conclusion, well, this is one of the systems that I adapt and I play. I'm sure there are many other ways to play for white that will give them some positional advantage. And variation, as I mentioned before, with f4 and e5 in a very early stage, like in this stage of the game, when d6, e4, g6, f4, and on bishop g7, bishop b5 check, it's also dangerous, very dangerous for black, and they have to be extremely precise to avoid some kind of disaster. For example, bishop d7 is bad because of e5, and now knight is hanging, and on knight g4, queen takes g4, and on knight h5, maybe e6. And black is in a lot of trouble here, a lot of trouble. So f4 is another way. It's a dangerous continuation. My recommendation is knight f3 and bishop g5. This is a quiet way to play and guarantees white some advantage. What I would say that Benoni players, if you really like Benoni and you really know well how to play, you go ahead and master on it and get whatever sources you can and try to do the best you can. But if you are not Benoni player, yes, then don't start playing Benoni now, because it's not really something you want to adapt at this stage of the game. So it's a lot better to play with some more sound openings. So this will conclude brief observation of Benoni, and we should be moving on.